creative work, we have the opportunity today to enter Ms. Armstrong's unique literary world. An author of fiction and an essayist, Ms. Armstrong draws her imagery from pop culture, gothic horror, specifically vampire literature, and the supernatural. She draws artistic inspiration from sources as diverse as James Ballard, William Burroughs, Algernon Blackwood, Sylvia Plath, and Patti Smith. Her prose is a poetic one and very humorous as well, as you are likely to find out. And through it, she will take us on a phantasmagorical, just wanted to say that, phantasmagorical journey into her creative world. Without any further elaboration, I will now introduce you and ask you to give a warm welcome to Ms. Allison Armstrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next slide up here. Okay. I might need help with the next slide. Oh, I get it. Okay, sorry about this. I'm not familiar with this machine. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay.
Should we put the light up?
Yeah. Actually need to read.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay. The little light.
I come scratching at your window, wraith claws caked with mud, hair sooty with revenant smoke from our embered fire. Where you walked, where you ate, encoded in me like a reflex gasp, you ruminated cud, resurging from dissolution. A strand of your hair, a yo-yo thread, binds me to you with need and dread. A lagging distemper disjoints, anoints, seethes, unsheathes, as I tap the glass with bleeding palms, stigmatized by your subcutaneous touch. The end times are coming, or so the preachers say, scuttling about like roaches, thriving on oblivion. In the meantime, I rest, not at peace, waiting for my awakener. A flower rots in my cramped fingers, pretty little lily corrupted, visions of half-attained desires, scenes from books and movies that fueled my imagination, combine in crazed mutations, atrocities of invention and compulsion, the poison apple visions of a slumbering Snow White whose prince has not yet come. I see my fragmented scream in a shard of shattered glass as the too late breaks squeal with futile remorse, and then I am silenced, shrouded, entombed. I wait for the call, the kiss. My muse is here, time to kill, then time to arise. The vampire, like the shapeshifter, the feral god of madness and creativity, the dangerous, seductive specter, and other phantoms of imagination, represents forces of life and death, control and chaos, obsessive addiction and limitless possibility. My interest in vampires, sparked in early adolescence, has remained a source of inspiration throughout my life. At times of the bleakest depression, the image of the vampire has infused me with life-sustaining vitality. The first vampire character I was aware of and then fascinated by was Barnabas Collins, portrayed by Jonathan Frid on the late afternoon Gothic soap opera Dark Shadows, ABC TV. Although Barnabas, unlike most contemporary depictions of the vampire, was neither beautiful nor depicted in a sexualized way, he nevertheless became a huge fan favorite amongst females of all ages, in part due to the character's strange blend of chivalry and savagery, sentimentality and ruthlessness. He was a melancholy romanticist mourning the loss of his first wife, all the while slyly courting her look-alike replacement. Beneath his polite, restrained persona, however, simmered a hungry, fanged, bloodthirsty beast, the monstrous side of himself he wished to eradicate but could not control. His double-edged nature intrigued me, his old-fashioned chivalric side soothing my early adolescent fears regarding sexuality, and the savage, feral side igniting my seething, angry feelings towards my human female body. Perhaps because I was reaching puberty around the same time as the Barnabas storyline began, the image of the vampire cast an especially potent magic, imprinting itself indelibly on my consciousness with its associations of blood, metamorphosis, animality, and transcendence. I dreaded the day when, as the smotheringly pink booklet given to the girls in my 5th grade class promised us, I would get my first period. I hated the way the book and the little Disney cartoon presented along with it depicted womanhood. A young lady, the movie narrator insinuated in a sweetly feminine voice, is like a flower, and as such is expected to be sweet, fragrant, pleasing to the eye, a passive recipient of adoration. Despite the foul-smelling, brackish blood that gushes in swampy clots from between her legs, she must appear and act as if she were delicate, demure, cheerful, and complacent. The thought of that degrading hypocrisy, as well as the grown-up womanly life awaiting us, disgusted me. I knew even then I would never want to have a baby, and I certainly never wanted to be subservient to a man. I envied animals who, lacking self-consciousness and absurdly impractical codes of etiquette, were not subjected to such ridiculous expectations. I especially envied the animals such as cats, who fanged and clawed, independent, resilient, gracefully at home in their bodies, and attuned to their wild nature, were free to be themselves. As the dreaded day inevitably came and menses arrived, I felt a deep revulsion towards my now developing body. It and the stagnant fluids it seeked betrayed me. I was imprisoned in this leaking, mutinous, all too mortal cage of flesh. Possessing the fangs and fierce instincts of the animals I most loved, yet free of the body's mortal limitations, the vampire, sublime predator, represented everything I desired. The vampire's communion of blood offered a release from the body's prison, providing death or immortality. Unlike the pubertal blood that I associated with shame and subjugation, the blood of vampire lore connoted power and transcendence. My fascination with vampires, fluctuating in intensity throughout the years, helped invigorate me in moments of despair and devitalization. One of the bleakest times, not only for myself, but probably for most people in the U.S., began with the September 11th, 2001 tragedy. Like many others, as a result of this devastating event, I was stricken by a pervasive, spirit-draining sense of gloom, apathy, and hopelessness. As I had done during other dismal moments of my life, I sought escape in depictions of dark yet transcendent realms. And this time I found revitalizing solace in the vampire character Caleb Morley, portrayed by Michael Easton in the ABC daytime drama Port Charles. Once again, an ABC soap was the catalyst for awakening my interest in vampires. Caleb, however, unlike Barnabas in Dark Shadows, embraced his fierce animalistic nature, savoring the blood, the ecstasy it gave, the immortality it made possible. Watching the story of Caleb unfold in all of its magic, seduction, passion, and splendor, I felt a resurgence of creative energy that sustained and inspired me, motivating me to begin new writing projects that were longer and more time-consuming, requiring a dedication, patience, and commitment that I had not previously experienced. Despite the various interpretations of vampires depicted in the numerous movies and TV shows I have watched, as well as the books I have read, the following key elements, to some degree, seem to form the basis of vampire allure. The power to grant immortality or death, the potential to change shape and or escape bodily limitations, the synthesis of animal, human, and divine characteristics, and the addictive, obsessive, enthralling sensory experiences vampirism provides. Although these enticements would be appealing to many people, regardless of age or gender, I believe they, like the seductive attributes of other dark entities, may especially resonate with adolescent and young adult females who, dissatisfied as I was with societal expectations and physical pubertal demands, seek imaginary creative release and empowerment. Okay, now throughout this discussion, any of you have questions or comments, feel free to interrupt me at any moment. So. He calls to me, my nameless muse. I've seen him from the corner of my unblinking eyes, redness briefly illuminating the all-inclusive blackness. Somewhere on a dark lake a foghorn sounds, desolate, empty of breath. Somewhere, scattered city lights sprinkle the night, distant and oblivious to private pain. Angels strum discordant harps, deafened by the echoes of desperate prayers, my own perhaps. Hush, hush, his presence seems to whisper, I am here. Sparks of confetti burst like supernovas, then sink back into black oblivion. Phosphorescent specks glide and weave, forming chains, flickering and merging. Fireflies emitting summons to distant mates. I'm here. I'm waiting, itching and twitching for you. The very ground beneath which I am submerged is twitching. It convulses and moans. The gauze shroud encasing me unravels and shreds. Something silken brushes against my hair, tickling my scalp with pinpricks of heat. Something soft yet bristly as a cat's tongue touches my lips. He unwraps the bandages, layer by layer, gauze by gauze. Her dark eyes unglaze, hieroglyphs decoded as she stares at white walls and white sheets. His lips press against hers, his slight bristle shaping her tender, newly healed skin, as her mouth opens expectantly. A drop of his blood trickles onto her tongue, releasing the words so long trapped in silence. My throat is parched and raw, shards of unuttered words lying cracked and jagged as the thick, rich fluid spills into the arid, silent crevices. The urn is shattered, the genie released. As I gaze up at the seductively beautiful man who has awakened me, I try to speak, but my voice sounds like a wind-up Victrola recording, creaky and faint. "Who are you?" I manage to ask. "I am the one you've dreamed of, the one you've always wanted," he murmurs, his long dark hair shimmering in a reddish swirl of light. The light glints in his blue-gray eyes like a Siamese cat's, sanguinary aquamarine. Something about his eyes, his hair, his sensual grace reminds me of the Tooth Fairy, but in male form. He is her counterpart, one of her chosen. "My name is etched upon your wild, defiant heart. Look within and you will see it. Open to me and you will hear it. It is a command, a promise of wholeness. To be not alone, such is my unanswered wish. To throw out the lure and be hooked instead, bait for one even hungrier than I." He whispers his name, a name of sharpness and sibilance, a secret name of ecstasy and magic. I kneel before him, a supplicant on the cold, polished floor. The light from stained glass windows pierces my heart like an angelic arrow thrust into St. Teresa. But my bringer of ecstasy is no angel. His light is not the white of frigid snowfields and sterile gloved surgeries, but is instead the red of blood and wrenching births, the release brought by the kiss of razors against obstinate flesh, the lacerating whisper of obscenities seducing obedience. I feel his mighty hands yank back my head, clawing into my hair. A shard of ice stabs my spine as fangs penetrate my neck. Ripples of pin-prickling shivers cascade down my back. He tears at my gown, ripping it into tatters on the prison-lit floor. With his hands still coiled in my hair, he rides me with the urgency and fury of a long-suppressed nightmare, flooding me with dissonant cravings. I need your fix. I need your strength. I need your magic. I need your life. A yowl, banshee beast released, echoes through vaulted hallways, rebirthing limbs of stone.
Where did you find these?
Question, yeah.
Where did you find these pictures?
These pictures here, that was Saint Teresa by Bernini. It was a statue. I think it's in Rome somewhere. Baroque period of art, and well, I always liked the depiction of the ecstasy and that kind of thing. It's like mystical, and yet it's also kind of sensual at the same time.
Yes, and there was another one that was in the beginning that she was, looked like a fallen angel in a bed or something.
Oh yes, I think that was a picture from, let me see if I can go back there. I think it was a picture from Highgate Cemetery. I do some Google searches, and I was actually in Highgate Cemetery in London, so
Right,
I
right.
found that picture there.
But they're very expressive.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let's see what I'm doing here. Okay, just getting here. Okay, let's go to this one.
Do you see yourself as the first picture? The
Yeah.
one, the first one in the rainbow?
Yeah, I see myself as a picture and as the, I guess as the female narrator, as kind of like a wish fulfillment to write the book.
Right.
Yeah.
And was that you with the, up against the?
Yes. Sorry, I had these all bookmarked and then they, oh, okay, here we go. Okay. This is a section called The Tooth Fairy, and it's kind of based on a childhood dream, and then it's, you know, fictionalized a whole lot. My tooth throbbed with a slow, grinding pain, the taste of blood mixing with the salt of tears and snot as I cried. Across the hall, my mother slept. Her gentle, snuffing exhalations, usually so comforting, failed to ease my pain and fear as the sounds outside my window, the rattle of June bugs against the screen, the crunch of staggering steps upon the fallen insect shells, crescendoed within the stifling loneliness of my room. Insistent accompaniments to the plodding monotone of my toothache. Suddenly, though, the click and clatter subsided, replaced by the lulling hiss of waves. Shh, it whispered, breathing into my ear as something mist-like touched my face. Opening my eyes, I saw a diaphanous scarf billowing around the bed. It whirled, a dancing, blurring cocoon of silk, from which the form of a woman, glistening with the powder of moth's wings, emerged. Her long black hair shone with the blue radiance of an underwater jellyfish, tentacles probing the darkness. Her long blue-white fingers drifted feather-like over my face and across my body, disappearing beneath my sheet. I felt them slip under my nightgown, caressing just on the edge of secret places. Cool air filled my mouth with the flavor of mint candy as a woman's graceful fingers, floating over my body, paused at my jaw. I heard a tinkling like faraway wind chimes as a belt of silver coins slithered across her hips and a necklace of shiny white beads rustled against her breast. As the woman rubbed my jaw, I smelled her lilac perfume, so sweet and tantalizing, I wanted to drift away into it, drown in its whirling, engulfing, suffocating fragrance. My room was spinning, pink and blue jelly beans, winding in cobblestone chains along a path. The woman was dancing, and as her feet touched each one of the jelly beans, I was transformed into a brightly colored sugar skull. In a voice low and yearning, she sang of autumn, of worm-wombed apples dropping from rust-leaved trees, of candy-sated children falling from nursery beds into swallowing maws beneath. The song rolled up and down my spine, pressing into it like the fingers of a flute player, probing the holes for hidden timbres. The song trilled through the hollow sockets of the candy skull held in the woman's hand and offered to me. I opened my mouth, savoring the sandy, sugared butter treat. But as I chewed on the delectably sticky morsel, I tasted something salty, felt a tugging as my tooth wobbled on its bloody filament. The woman's thin fingers, suddenly thrust inside my mouth, coiled around the tooth, yanking it free from its cushion of taffy. From her belt, the woman unfastened one of the silver coins and gently patting my pillow, placed it underneath. Around her neck, the white beads clicked and sparkled, teeth of children glistening, incisor joining molar, joining bicuspid, and a necklace dance throbbing together to the rhythm of dying insect wings. Okay, I'll skip ahead because a couple of them I'm doing. Okay, this one. To shed my mortal skin and assume the form of something fierce, defiant to time and anthropomorphic morality, has been a fantasy of mine since childhood. Envying the predatory animals and their supernatural counterparts, the creatures of the night, I would imagine myself mutating in the darkness, my flesh like a pallid mushroom, taking nutrients from the luminous moonlight and damp soil enriched with the bones of long-dead beasts, carnivore cousins with dagger-sharp fangs and claws. My bones, enshrouded in their soft ephemeral sack, poked and prodded, wanting to break free of their suffocating shelter and join with the spirits of those slumbering ancients. My teeth jutted, jabbing against the insides of my cheek, and I tasted my blood, sweet and sad, like a beloved lament, as the feral ancestors beckoned me into their dreams. Inevitably, though, sleep or a distracting thought would intrude upon my secretly coveted fantasy, and I would find myself disappointingly unchanged, a mere human with blunted teeth and nearly non-existent claws. Eventually, my belief in a wish-fueled metamorphosis faded, shriveling in dismal daylight reality like a darkness-dwelling worm on sun-baked cement. The yearning to transcend, at least temporarily, my human form, however, never died. Reading Emil Ferris's My Favorite Thing is Monsters rouses these restlessly hibernating reveries of my youth. In Ferris's graphic novel, the pre-adolescent narrator, Karen, like myself as a child, envisions otherworldly, uncanny beasts, the monsters of late-night horror films, as sources of creative escape. Ferris's depiction of Karen's monster fantasies and homoerotic stirrings while struggling with family tragedies, violence, and prejudice during the late 1960s, though often grim, is nevertheless refreshingly perceptive and inspiring, infused with wit, a sense of childhood resilience, and untarnished insight. As a monster-loving kid who grew up during the same time period as Ferris's book, I identify very closely with the narrator's imaginative responses to popular cultural influences, gender stereotypes, and her own homoerotic feelings. As Karen attempts to come to grips with her impending puberty and the traditional feminine restrictions connected with it, she also becomes increasingly aware of her bisexual or lesbian urges. Her best friend, Missy, shares a fascination with supernatural creatures, and after the two girls watch the mildly suggestive sapphic scenes in Dracula's Daughter, Missy confides her love for Karen. Their love for each other, however, is thwarted by Missy's mother, who, associating monsters with same-sex attraction, prevents Missy from seeing Karen and tries to get Missy to renounce her interest in horror movies. Throughout the novel, Ferris draws subtle parallels between monsters and the feared, shunned aspects of society and ourselves, the people, impulses, and possibilities that frighten yet sometimes entice us. Although, unlike Karen, I balked at confronting my feelings regarding sexuality, remaining basically closeted until later in life, I experienced a similar antipathy towards traditional gender roles and male-female relationships. I envied the so-called monsters, the vampires and werewolves, that were free to assume various forms, shifting from skin to skin, defying most societal and sexual constraints. Vampires gracefully courted lovers and potential victims of both sexes, while lycanthropes, like their animal counterparts, the powerful, magnificent wolves, transcended human gender restrictions. Fiercely able to defend themselves and their loved ones, they had no fear of unwanted sexual assaults, a point Karen perceptibly points out when, having escaped an attempted rape, she exclaims, "Being a human girl stinks compared to being a monster. When I'm a monster, I won't have to keep my mouth shut. No, I'll open my mouth and use my rows of sharp teeth to rip up guys who attack." In addition to envying their freedom from physical and social limitations, their power to fight attackers I, like Karen, wish to possess the supernatural creature's immunity to disease and most forms of death. In Karen's case, a growing awareness of death is intensified by our mother's fatal illness. Karen yearns to be magically transformed into an immortal monster who can then give the gift of everlasting life to her mother and brother. Unfortunately, her wish cannot be granted, and she helplessly watches her mother die of breast cancer. Grief-stricken and angry that she cannot save her mom, Karen has a dream in which she destroys the monsters who abandoned her in her time of need. As she lashes out in vengeance, however, she feels even more empty and alone without her beloved monsters. She begins to realize that the monsters she adores, draws, and writes about are her salvation. They are her imaginative affirmation of her own self-worth and uniqueness. Ferris's poignant description of Karen's reaction to her mother's terminal disease highlights the limitations as well as the power of fantasy. Although Karen's monsters cannot do anything to help her mother, they, in a sense, enable Karen to creatively channel and express her feelings towards death. These mesmerizing creatures of myth, vampires in particular, represent the ageless, disease-free immortality we as humans crave but cannot achieve. For myself, as well as for Karen, they promised a healing antidote to death's devastation, a comforting fantasy as we grimly prepared for the inevitable metamorphosis puberty would bring, and dreaded the even more terrifying transformation awaiting us towards the end of life. As an adolescent, I had my first close encounter with human mortality when my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Dorothy, a frequent visitor, was diagnosed with cancer. At the time of Dorothy's diagnosis, I'd recently entered puberty and also had become fascinated with vampires. A bitter family argument had temporarily eroded my grandmother's relationship with Dorothy, but when we heard about Dorothy's illness soon afterwards, my grandmother and her sister reconciled. Dorothy's visits resumed, but although my family tried to assume a hopeful, optimistic demeanor, I found it almost impossible to suppress my sorrow, fear, and revulsion regarding the progressive deterioration Dorothy's cancer and gruesome chemotherapy treatments had wrought. Emaciated, jaundiced, Dorothy was being transformed from the inside out, undergoing a monstrous metamorphosis that could not be stopped until she was dead. As I watched the cancer agonizingly consume Dorothy, I was horrified by the ways her body seemed to conspire against her, mounting its merciless insurrection. I began to fear my body and its deceptive, unreliable familiarity. It had already conspired against me with its pubertal swellings and leakings, but someday, eventually, it would perpetrate a much greater sabotage. My flesh was treacherous, not to be trusted. More than ever, I longed to escape my physical female form. More than ever, I yearned for my vampires in their healing transmutation. Although they could not grant me or my loved ones the transforming bite I desired, they invigorated me with their eternal, enigmatic allure. Many years later, my grandfather, who lived with my grandmother, my mother, and me, was also stricken by cancer. This time the cancer progressed more slowly, but the overall destination was the same. Month by month, Grandpa became weaker, skinnier, his bones beginning to proclaim victory against their imprisoning flesh. A part of myself, the monster within, seemed to envy this emancipation from fleshly flux. The monster sickened my already meager appetite and was delighted when my bones began to prevail. What others would term anorexia was merely a label lacking context. It, like the vampires and the other dark entities within my imagination, offered refuge. It was my way of escaping into a more permanent world of bone, a sanctuary of stillness, hard as unyielding as stone, as protective as the coffin of an undead revenant. The skeleton I'd encountered in a nightmare when I was 3 years old, the one who wanted to cuddle with me in my bed, I realized is merely a part of myself, a suppressed monster who wanted to be acknowledged. Only by recognizing it and the secrets it wished to share, using it as inspiration, could I begin to realize more of my creative potential. Monsters take many forms, although usually depicted as frightening and malevolent. They can also, at times, provide shelter from things more terrifying, such as death, disease, suffering, and other things that threaten one's individuality, self-determination, integrity, creativity. As Ferris's book powerfully demonstrates, they allow us to retreat into regenerative inner darkness from which we can emerge strengthened and revitalized. Any questions? I have like one more excerpt if we, a couple more excerpts if we have time. But
We have time, yes.
got time? Okay.
That's good.
Okay. This next part has to do with my inspiration with cats. And cats, ever since I saw the movie Thomasina when I was a child, and I've always had pets in my family, cats and dogs. I've been fascinated with cats and their kind of magical, mystical associations. Bastet in Egyptian mythology, and then in the Middle Ages they were associated with witchcraft. And in contemporary times, cats have gotten kind of a bad rap because they are associated with toxoplasmosis, a disease which can also be spread by raw meat and some other types of animals. But it is, found with cats too. And cats, as a result of toxoplasmosis, cats have even been associated with the so-called crazy cat lady syndrome, in which people supposedly who get exposed to toxoplasmosis develop symptoms of schizophrenia, and in some cases may end up becoming so attached with their cats that when they grow old and die, the cats eat them. There have been cases, minor cases of that. I found some old pictures from London Illustrated News in the 1890s of people getting attacked by cats and old ladies hoarding cats and all this kind of thing. And this first picture here, Steinlen, is kind of, I think they used this whole scene in Thomasina also. It looks like the symbol of Bastet up there. So personally I love cats, or love dogs too, but cats exert a special power in my imagination, and a lot of literary heroes such as William Burroughs adored cats. So in my book Revenants, I have a section about a woman that loves her cats, and as you'll see what happens to her.
It's nothing good.
Eat or be eaten. The peeling sign warns all those who enter. Beside the doorway, hidden by the fortress of garbage cans and soggy cardboard, squirming, sausage-shaped newborn kittens suckle their mother's tits. Tiny, mewling cries of hunger and satisfaction affirm desire for life. We follow the trail of cats, the yowling horde traipsing through the alley and leaping into a nearby apartment's open windows. The mother cat we saw in the doorway of the restaurant Dream is the last to arrive. She carries her squalling kittens one by one into the room and stands over them protectively, guarding them from the unruly mob. To this small home of her provider, the dreamer, she has returned. Let me just interject here. In the book, the vampire characters can invade the dreams of people who want to die, or in turn want to be transformed. And so we get a signal when somebody's having this kind of dream, and we provide what they desire. On the black and white linoleum kitchen floor, the woman lies, water from a broken yellow ceramic bowl spilling out onto her white cotton nightgown. Her leg is twisted to one side, and a scraggly tiger cat is nibbling at her calloused toes, purring with hungry contentment. The woman whimpers, a high-pitched crooning, "No!" as the other cat starts sauntering towards her, yowling and staring. From a gash on her temple, blood trickles slowly. Apparently, she had been refilling the cat's water dish when she slipped on some water, fell, and injured herself. An orange tabby, round as a jack-o'-lantern, licks at her head wound, tearing off a small piece of skin and growling menacingly as a slender Siamese approaches. Timidly, the Siamese retreats, finding an unguarded area by the woman's thigh to chew upon. Whoops, wrong one. Sorry. Okay. James, the woman gurgles, staring up at a black cat with mantis green eyes who crouches beside her. He gives a slight mew of acknowledgement, then baps his paw at her fearfully fluttering eyelids and rubs his tail against her horror-stricken face. Milling around her and meowing triumphantly, more cats claim spaces beside her helplessly writhing body. Theirs is a victory, but a victory, unfortunately, to share. A lanky gray cat with a tattered ear claws at a plump, fluffy white cat, snatching a piece of gristle from the longer-haired feline, who is too lazy and well-fed to put up much of a fight. Other cats, calico, tuxedo, young and old, hastily gobble shreds of flesh torn from the woman's legs and torso. They glance up at us, eyes questioning, wary. Inside, their semi-conscious entree, toxoplasma, lurks. The unacknowledged Gandhi god parasite presiding over the feast. Although merely a protozoa, this being has spun the thread of fate, which now, like a spooling ball of yarn, entices the cats, goads them into action. It tickles inside the woman's slowing brain, sending out the summons, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." It is the prototype morbidity, the worm in the shriveled apple, the beckoning finger of the forbidden. The cats heed this call of the wild, the saber-toothed hiss, reclaiming their kind from the bonds of domesticity. No more will they consent to be human playthings. They are no longer complacent, Purina-placated predators. They, like us, have abandoned the mastery of human rules. Trying to perceive the dying woman's mental images, I sense surges of panic, followed by cold, grim sloughs of resignation, sharp crests, and flat, featureless plains. Erratic visions of cats with pointed, fiery auras, like those in the art of Louis Wayne, dissolve into mandala patterns. Gleaming orange eyes, gazing into an abyss of squirming fetal forms, larvae metamorphosing into skull-winged moths, bringing escape from loneliness. Slithering past the silken, growling thong, we lie down beside the woman's head. The cats, intimidated by our unearthly scent, neither animal nor human nor anything they have encountered, watch as we close her eyes, concluding the scenario scripted by viruses. Immune to the karma encoded by Toxo and his infectious cohorts, we drink in the throbbing essence of her sadly stunted life. Since this is my first experience at a kill, my awakener lets me take what I need first before joining in. Her blood, though not nearly as rich, complex, and invigorating as my awakener's, has a surprisingly musky, feral taste, sharply contrasting with a repressed, spinsterous appearance. Each swallow reveals intriguing flashes of memory. I see the woman in her childhood, blonde, with long braids and a carefree, wide-gapped smile. She's giggling as she holds a black kitten in her arms. I see her a few years later, standing in the backyard of a suburban home, crying as she places a glass jar filled with dandelions on a mound of dirt, the grave of her first pet. She is cursing God for taking her cat, and her face, defiant despite her tears, is unforgiving. A few swallows more brings me to her teenage years. She sits in her bedroom of what appears to be the same suburban home and is scribbling angrily in her diary. I hate that boy, she writes and scratches with a pencil as if to blot out his existence. Junior high makes me sick. I don't ever want to grow up. Things will just keep getting worse and worse the older I get. As I near the end of my feast, the memories get denser, more clogged and bleak. I see her in her 20s, watching people gyrating in a dance club, the clothes and dance moves glitzy, devoid of spontaneity. I see her perhaps 10 years later, wearily returning home to her New York City apartment, closing the drapes, turning on the TV, and feeding her 5 cats. My last swallow of her brings me to a much more recent memory. She is sitting in her chair, 9 cats mealing and mewing around her, 1 cat lying above her chair, his green eyes majestic and imperious. Although the rest of the woman's life has been stifled, snuffed in joy and creativity, her cat, this one in particular, reminds her of the vital, free, willful being she once was, the being that I can still taste within her blood. What made her turn so bitter and depressed I can never know for sure. Except for the memories I briefly glimpsed, the rest of her life remains an untapped enigma, her yearnings nearly smothered until death's release. Only now is she free to flow into those thrillingly dangerous realms of her childhood dreams. Only now can she undulate through the keyholes, slip past the censors. Having become one with her beloved cats, she will never be alone. With them, she will glide through the darkness, free, savoring all her fantasies. I think I ended there. Any questions or comments? Thanks.
Well, first I'd like to thank Allison for doing this wonderful reading and presentation. I'd like to give her a round of applause. As you talk, I was thinking about transcendence.
Yes.
And I was thinking about the comparison between the vampire as one who transcends the physicality, the limitations of the mortal life, with that of the artist,
Yes.
who transforms our limitations of anxieties and limitations, etc., into something else. Maybe you could speak about that a little?
Well, yes, I think in imagination, as in dreams, we do kind of have the power to like leave our bodies and become something else, become like a wish fulfillment, or investigate different possibilities and our imagination. So it is a sense of freedom, a sense of transcending limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak a little? I was thinking
Sorry.
also about Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, she penned Frankenstein in what year was that?
Like
early
1800s.
Yes. And I was thinking how women have been so integral, really, in terms in horror fiction. Could you speak a little about that and about the unique role of imagery in horror in terms of the female psyche and experience?
Okay, well, I think women traditionally are either genetically or just the way they're brought up or whatever. They have a more subjective sense, or at least they developed a subjective sense of the imagination. And for that reason, a lot of times women have been associated with witchcraft, anything pertaining to dreams, like Orphic, the Delphic oracle, and that anything, the realms beyond like practical reality. So women have this natural tendency to delve into subjective realms, and it's given them, although suppressed by society, it's given them this unique freedom of the creativity. And also I think women find through the supernatural the freedom to express the parts of themselves that are less socially acceptable, kind of like their doppelganger selves, through the monster, the vampire, the werewolf, whatever, that kind of their shadow self.
Thank you.
Yes.
So you think that that's rage? Do you think that other part of the woman is her rage, or the thing that she can't let out on a daily basis?
It can be rage, it can be frustration, it can be aggression, anything, just a sense of wildness. I mean, you know, as a child you don't have that many restrictions except for safety, you know, parental things with safety and that, but imagination-wise, I mean, you can pretend to be an animal, and then all of a sudden you get to a certain age and you're not supposed to pretend to be an animal anymore, and you have to dress nicely and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
No, I really like when you were talking earlier about the whole menstruation part, because I did experience that at a very young age, and it was very traumatic for me.
Yeah.
But there was, you know, like the happiness that my mother and my grandmother felt, it wasn't what I was feeling.
Yeah, I thought it was horrible.
So
I
when you
cried.
explained it, and then it was very overflowing. It was a lot, and it was like a young age, and it was, you know, it was traumatic. And just the fact that you're talking about that, and
It was like gross.
it just brought back so many memories. I was like, wow, this is exactly how I felt. Like,
Yeah, and I know even
I don't
now.
feel like a pretty flower.
Yeah, even now, though things have been more open, I mean, you still see all these, I hate these like menstruation commercials, and like other things, like they have the little cartoon girl now, like, and she's like at a party and she's laughing.
Having a
So
great
sometimes
time,
something else
yeah.
breaks free or whatever, and you know, it's like, she's like so
she's
perfect.
swimming and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, that really hit home for me. I'm sorry if I laughed aloud.
No, that's okay, I'm glad you did.
I have a little shift or a suggestion of a shift. With my 15-year-old son in the room, and son, where should I point him in terms of either pop culture or literature? Yeah, I'm giving you homework, guy. That, you know, what movie should he watch, or what book should he be reading?
Well, I definitely, yeah, I'd read the classics like Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, definitely.
Frankenstein.
Dracula, Bram Stoker. I think I read that like in junior high, and you know, that's pretty much starts all the thing. It has a lot of stuff about the female vampires being like aggressive and everything that the Victorian ladies aren't supposed to be. And then I would suggest, let me see. Well, I would suggest that graphic novel I mentioned, Emil Ferris, definitely. That's an amazing book that just came out like last year, and she illustrates it like, she writes from the perspective of a teenage girl, kind of an androgynous teenage girl, and she illustrates it as if she's writing in a notebook, and so I'd highly recommend that.
Is there anything out there you find that's misrepresenting the genre?
The what?
Is there anything out there to stay away from, or this doesn't really well represent this area?
Well, I personally don't care for, just my own personal preference, I don't really care for like a lot of these genre vampire romances or something. I don't like the books where it's like the male vampire just has all the power and the woman just like fawns over him, and then half the time she doesn't even get to be a vampire, and the whole thing is like erotica. I don't like all that erotica stuff. I mean, it can be erotica in it if it's like more like mystical or something symbolic, but I just really, I think that's kind of exploitative and,
Yeah, it's not Bernini.
yeah.
I would also recommend, of course, Allison's 2 books, Toxicosis and Revenants.
Yeah, that's the first one, this is the sequel, and then, some of the things I read from this book isn't out yet, this is just a little promo thing that I made just to promote, but I don't have extra copies of it unfortunately, but I hope to get this out with a lot more essays and maybe some fiction stories in there as well, next year I'm hoping.
Well, we hope to have you back for that
Okay.
as well, and again, thank you very much.
Glad you could come, I'd like to,
Yeah,
are you gonna have a, we'll sign when
can stop
you're
it.
gonna do yours?
Yes, I would love to.